Hello, and welcome back to Entering the Infinite, the Magic the Gathering podcast where we dive into infinite combos. I'm your host, Aaron Bennick. Last week, we talked all about Sararak the Arclich, an interesting new commander from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. But this week, we're backtracking, going back a couple of sets to Kaldheim, to build around a very interesting Sultai-colored commander, Jorn, God of Winter. Jorn is 2 and a green for a 3/3 god. Whenever Jorn attacks, untap each snow permanent you control. And he does have a flip side to him. It is Cold Ring, the Rhyme Staff. It's 1, a blue and a black for a legendary snow artifact. Tap it. You may play target snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped, one of the new MDFCs from Kaldheim. Now, we're not going to be building around Cauldring. We're going to be building around the front face of Jorn. So a couple of the main themes of the deck. First things first is snow. Jorn wants us to have a lot of snow permanents. That way he can untap them whenever he attacks. So getting to untap almost every permanent, or at the very least, every one of our lands is a really, really good ability to have. Getting to double our mana every turn, play something, go to combat, play something else after combat. Essentially getting 2 turns in one is great value just on its own, even without any kind of combo shenanigans. The next part of the deck, big spells. So getting to untap every land means that you can cast bigger and bigger spells every single turn. So you can cast a Cultivate, and then also a Kodama's Reach. Or you can cast a Cultivate into a Skyshroud Claim, because that land that you got off of the Cultivate will untap when Jorn goes to combat. X spells with Jorn are especially good. They let us use every single bit of mana that we have and really get maximum value out of those. So Jorn untapping all of our permanents has more combo potential than Cold Ring reanimating one thing. You can build around Cold Ring, however, you do need to go through more hoops in order to actually build combo around Cold Ring itself. You need a lot more pieces, you need to jump through a lot more hoops in order to be able to untap Cold Ring a lot. But with Jorn himself, his ability is a lot more abusable. So the main combo of the deck that we're going to be playing with is repeating the trigger of Jorn to untap all our permanents an infinite number of times. Now, the way that we're going to do that is either with Thermal Flux. It's 1 blue for an instant. Choose one. Target non-snow permanent becomes snow until end of turn. Or target snow permanent isn't snow until end of turn. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So we are going to need Thermal Flux or Rime Feather Owl. 5 and 2 blue for a snow creature bird. Flying, Rime Feather Owl's power and toughness are each equal to the number of snow permanents in play. 1 and a snow mana, which is any color of mana as long as it's from a snow permanent. Put an ice counter on target permanent, and permanents with ice counters on them are snow. So either one of these cards, and then either one of the next 2 cards. Lithoform Engine, it's 4 mana for a legendary artifact. 2, tap it, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. 3, and tap it, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Or 4, and tap it, copy target permanent spell you control. The copy becomes a token. So either the Lithoform Engine or the Strionic Resonator, which is 2 mana for an artifact. 2 mana, tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, the way that this combo works is you either need Thermal Flux or the Owl, or the Resonator or the Engine. Either one of the 2 are interchangeable. You can use either the Thermal Flux or the Owl, or the Lithoform Engine and the Resonator. They all work together. So, for simplicity's sake, we're going to go with the 2 easiest ones to use, which is just Thermal Flux and the Strionic Resonator. So, Thermal Flux turns the Strionic Resonator to snow. Target non-snow permanent becomes snow until end of turn. So we use that, turn the Strionic Resonator to snow. which then, whenever Jorn attacks, he untaps the Strionic Resonator. So then we use it whenever it untaps to copy Jorn's triggered ability again, floating all our mana in response, which then untaps the Strionic Resonator again. So doing that an infinite number of times, we will generate infinite mana of any color because we're untapping all of our snow lands as well. So you might be thinking, that's an attack trigger, so we can't do that before or after combat and save all the mana because we'll empty from the mana pool. Well, that is right. So the first part is, how do you cast a spell during combat? One of the easiest ways to do it is to give all of your spells flash. So I've included quite a different variety of flash cards here, so I'm going to go over the 2 land options first. So the first one is Alchemist's Refuge. It's a land. Tap, add 1 colorless, or for green and a blue, tap it. You may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had flash. So activate that. You can cast anything whenever you want. And then Thermal Flux on the Resonator. Get infinite mana. Boom. You play your Haymaker, and it's easy. It's done. Another land option that is a little less useful, but I think is probably still worth playing, is Emergent Zone. Again, just a land. Tap, add colorless. 1 tap, sacrifice Emergent Zone. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. So it does the same thing, but you do have to sacrifice the Emergent Zone, which is why I think that the Alchemist Refuge is definitely above the Emergent Zone, but it's probably still worth playing both of them. And then the easiest ways to make your spells flash is playing permanents that let you cast things at flash speed. So the first one is a reprint from M20. It went down significantly in price. It's really easy to pick up. Leyline of Anticipation, 2 blue for an enchantment. If Leyline of Anticipation is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield, and you may cast spells as though they had flash. Real simple, easy to use, 4 mana, play it, or if you're lucky enough, it could end up in your opening hand. Just gives all your cards flash. The next one is a little bit pricey, but it's just 4 mana, everything has flash. Vidalcan Orrery, 4 of any color for an artifact, you may cast non-land cards as though they had flash. Basically the same thing. And then the last one is actually very interesting. And I think the second line of text on this card is why it's definitely worth playing. So, it's from Commander 2020, Tidal Barracuda. It is 3 and a blue for a creature fish. It's a 3/4. Any player may cast spells as though they had flash, which might seem like a downside at first. However, its second line of text says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So, all your opponents can play whatever they want during anybody's turn, except yours. Meaning that when you go to combo off, you know that your combo is safe because your opponent can't cast any spells during your turn. So these cards let us cast whatever we want, whenever we want. Leyline starts on the board if it's on your opening hand. Vidalcan Orrery is expensive, but it's up to you if you want to run the redundancy. And Barracuda prevents our combo from being interrupted, so I feel like each of these has its own upside and downside. Another way that we can cast spells during combat is a very strange and a very old card, Quicken. It is 1 blue for an instant. The next sorcery card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. So it can be cast as anytime you can cast an instant. Draw a card. So Quicken only has 1-time use, similar to Emergent Zone. But it's also a simple cantrip if you need it to be. So if you don't have any use for it, you don't have anything set up yet, you can just pay 1 blue, cycle it, essentially. Most of the win spells that I'm going to talk about later in the game will be sorceries. So it's not always going to be a dead card. And if it is a dead card, 1 blue, cycle it, draw a different card. So that's it for Flash. Another way that I thought to be able to use all of that mana that Jorn gives us is to be able to save all of that mana. So we've got Krufix, God of Horizons, 3 a green and a blue for a legendary enchantment creature god, 4/7, indestructible. As long as your devotion to green and blue is less than 7 Krufix isn't a creature, you have no maximum hand size. If unused mana would empty from your mana pool, that mana becomes colorless instead. So, we make infinite mana, we opt out of the combat step, all of the mana that we make is then going to filter out and then just become colorless. And we can still cast the rest of the spell, even if all of our mana becomes colorless, because Jorn will still untap all of our permanents, all of our lands, at the end of combat. So his last ability triggers, it goes off, you choose not to copy it, you untap all your lands, go to your second main phase, all of that mana becomes colorless, and then you have double black, double green, triple blue, whatever you need to cast that really big spell. And then with the printing of Commander Legends, we got a second version of Krufix. It's the Horizon Stone. 5 mana for an artifact. If you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. So they both essentially do the same thing, and for even the same cost. So instead of casting a spell during combat, these cards prevent us from losing all of that mana. You only need enough to cast the colored cost, and then you have infinite colorless to use on X, which is a great way to win the game. X spells, like I said earlier, let you use as much mana as you need to in order to get maximum value out of it. So X spells give us a lot of value even without the infinite mana, and they're absolutely sure to win us the game when we do. So the question is, what kind of X spells do we want to use? So there are X spells that can create infinite creatures, empty the pits, XX, and quadruple black for an instant. Put X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped. There's also Gelatinous Genesis, XX, and a green for sorcery. Create X, XX, green and use creature tokens. These ways of winning are unreliable. You'll have to survive until your next turn to win, and you're not guaranteed to actually keep any of the tokens that you make. You have to wait 3 other turns before anyone draws any kind of interaction, before they have an answer to your huge board, or they just kill you outright. So, in making infinite creatures, unreliable. The next way that we could win is we could create infinite combat damage. So there are cards such as Exponential Growth, a new one from Strixhaven, XX, and green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, double target creature's power X times. We also have Primal Might, which is X and a green. Target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, then it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Both of these, in conjunction with casting at flash speed and then using our infinite mana into X, will give Jorn an infinite +X/+X, so then he can one-shot an opponent. However, this only kills one person, so I don't think that it's very much worth it to go through all that trouble only to kill one person. We would rather kill all of our players at the same time, which leads into the best options that we have, which is infinite damage. In Torment of Hailfire, which is X, a black and a black for a sorcery, repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So you only need to put so much into X before your opponents sacrifice all the permanents and discard all their cards, and they have no choice but to take that life an infinite number of times until they're dead. The other way to deal infinite damage to our opponents is Exsanguinate, which is X, a black and a black for a sorcery. Very simple. Each opponent loses X life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. Just X is equal to 999,872 billion. Whatever. Each opponent loses that much life. game is over. Definitely the base options, and they're great finishers even without infinite mana. If you can just cast a big enough Exsanguinate, you can just win. If you just wait long enough, you can rack up to 20 mana, cast Exsanguinate for X's 18, and that might just be enough to close out the game. Another way to win, using cards that we're already going to put in our deck anyway, is infinite draw cards. So we've got cards like Blue Sun Zenith, X triple blue for an instant, target player draws X cards, shuffle Blue Sun Zenith into its owner's library. So we're going to play a card like this anyway in order to refill our hand as much as we can with Jorn's ability. So if we happen to have Blue Sun Zenith in our hand and we have infinite mana, you can still kill a person with Blue Sun Zenith. You target one of your opponents, make them draw an infinite number of cards, and they automatically lose. There are a lot of cards that have the same effect to them. So we've got Blue Sun Zenith already. We've got Commander's Insight, which is a new one from Commander 2021. It is X and triple blue for an instant. Target player draws X cards plus an additional card for each time they've cast a commander from the command zone this game. That second part of text, not too relevant. That first part, target player draws X cards, that's what we want. So we can either play this on ourselves, draw 10, 15, 20, refill our hand, get the cards that we need, or we can cast this on an opponent and just completely nuke them out of the game, having them draw their entire library plus a bajillion. Another card that does the same thing, has the same kind of utility. It's a little pricey though. Brain Geyser. X blue blue for a sorcery, target player draws X cards. We also have Damnable Pact, which is a bit more of an interesting one. It is X black black for a sorcery, target player draws X cards and loses X life. So this one you might want to be careful casting on yourself, but Damnable Pact for X's 5 is usually pretty okay. And still has the same utility. We can still use it on our opponents. Stroke of Genius. X, 2 and a blue. For an instant, target player draws X cards. Same thing. Either cast it on ourselves or cast it on our opponent. So we're going to use cards like this anyway. That way we can refill our hand. A couple of other ones. One of the other ones that we can play is like a Pull from Tomorrow. It doesn't let us target our opponents with it, but you just draw X cards and then discard a card. We want as many redundant effects like this as we can, especially ones that are instants, so then we can just keep our hand full as we're playing the deck. These are all an okay backup plan. Each of them only kills one person, but we're going to play X draw spells anyway to take maximum advantage of Jorn and all of the mana that he gives us. So, one of the other very interesting ways to win is Infinite Mill. So, as I was looking through X spells to see what we can get, there were quite a few that I kind of pondered in the mill section. So the first one that I want to talk about is Dread Summons. So it's X, a black and a black, for sorcery. Each player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. For each creature card put into a graveyard this way, you create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. So that second line of text, where you make creature tokens, completely irrelevant. This card could not have that text, and I think I would still play it as a finisher, because you simply make each player mill equal to their library. So nobody will have a library. You pass the turn, it goes to your opponent. He draws, he dies. It goes to the next opponent. He draws, he dies. It goes to the next opponent. He draws, he dies. By default, technically you are the last one standing. Although if someone has Eldrazi Titans or something like that, then they won't be milled out because it'll just keep going back in their library. But other than that, this is an instant win. All of your opponents lose before you do, unless they have some kind of shenanigans, but I wouldn't worry so much about that. And then the other one that we have is Fascination. So it is X, a blue and a blue for a sorcery. Choose one. Each player draws X cards, or each player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So basically the same thing as Dread Summons. We don't want to use the first mode on this. We don't want our opponents to draw a bunch of cards unless we're actually killing them. We can't use the first mode either, because then we will also draw infinitely. If we choose to play it infinitely, we can't use the first mode. Otherwise, we will also draw infinitely, and the entire game will end in a tie. And we don't want that. We would rather play, each player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. That way, we pass the turn, goes to our opponent, he's dead. Next opponent, he's dead. Next opponent, they're dead too. And then, these are all of the mill cards that I found. There is one more, I forgot. There is Mind Grind, which is arguably the best one of either of these, since it only targets opponents. And you might even be able to get a win on this without infinite mana, just by creating a bunch of mana with Jorn. Mind Grind, X, a black and a blue. For a sorcery, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals X land cards, then puts all cards revealed this way into his or her graveyard. X can't be 0. So, let's imagine this for a second. We go to combat, we float all our mana, we attack with Jorn, we untap everything, we tap everything again. X is equal to, let's say, 20. Most commander decks, I would say, run about anywhere from 36 to 42 maybe lands. I feel like 40 is the cap for most decks. So if you have a way to even just get to 20 mana, which if you're running a very impressive ramp package, then that should be no problem. Then you can just cast Mind Grind and just kill all of your opponents, even without infinite mana to put into X. Same thing with Exsanguinate, same thing with Torment of Hailfire. If you just cast these spells big enough, you can win even without putting infinite mana into them. So as I was looking at mill cards, these are really the only 3 that I thought were good enough to be playing in the deck. But there was one very interesting one that I kind of want to talk about. It's Villainous Wealth. So this card has a very high ceiling, but also a very low floor. So I'll start by reading it. Villainous Wealth, X, a black, a green, and a blue for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. You may cast any number of spells with converted mana cost X or less from among them without paying their mana costs. So this card is very interesting in the way of finishers. So you could cast this infinitely big on an opponent and get all of their spells. Now, if you do that, that opponent won't have any cards left in their library, so they will lose on their turn, meaning all the permanents that you took will go away, if you took any permanents. Now, you could Villainous Wealth for infinite and then just say, I will Villainous Wealth you for, let's say, 70. That leaves probably about maybe 15, 20 cards left in their library, so then you can keep all of the cards that you take, but it still lets you cast most of their deck. So, I don't know about you, but absolutely cutting the legs off of one person and then casting an entire deck in one turn seems good enough to make the rest of the table concede. So, if I played this at my table, for example, I have a lot of very aggro-heavy decks in my meta. So I could play Villainous Wealth on one of my good friends. He's got a mono-black Crick deck. I could play Villainous Wealth on Crick and immediately put almost every card onto the table. I know he would quit the game almost right then and there. But the other players, facing down all of the big black spells that he's got in that deck, that Crick lets you cast for so much cheaper, they might also concede upon seeing that. So, it's a win against a single opponent, milling them out, if that's the way that you decide to go. But getting to play an entire player's deck in one turn might also just make the other players concede on the spot, if you choose wisely. I don't think that I would cast Villainous Wealth on maybe the mono blue player. It might just be mostly draw spells and counter spells. But I would absolutely play Villainous Wealth on the dinosaur player, getting all of those big, nasty haymakers onto my board, leaving that player alive just for a couple of turns, maybe with 5 cards left in his library. That way, he's absolutely crippled. He can't do anything for the rest of the game, but you still get to keep all of those cards. So I definitely think that this card is worth considering. It's worth testing, and I definitely think that it's a lot of fun to play in this deck if you play your cards right and if you choose right. So we've gone over the combo. We've gone over ways to actually cast our combo to save our mana, to cast it at instant speed. And we've gone over ways that we can actually win. But the other kind of cards that Jorn wants is snow cards. So Jorn lets us untap all of our snow permanents. So we want to play as many snow permanents as we possibly can. So the entire mana base should only be snow lands to take maximum advantage of his ability. It should only be snow duels, fetch lands if you can afford them. Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, these are also fine just to fix your mana and get snow basics. Most of the mana base is going to be snow basics. That way you can take maximum advantage. But there are plenty of other snow cards that we can play that are just as interesting. So most snow cards, I looked over them, they aren't that great for the kind of deck that we're trying to play, but there are definitely some notable includes. So the first one is Boreal Druid. It is 1 green for a snow creature, an elf druid. It taps to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. It's a 1/1. It's sort of a snow Land of War Elves. It doesn't tap for any colored, but Jorn only says permanent. He doesn't say snow lands or snow creatures. So playing the Boreal Druid, untapping it, will let us get access to even more mana. The next one is Cold Steel Heart. It is 2 mana for a snow artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped. As it enters, choose a color, tap it, add 1 mana of the chosen color. Basically the same thing as Boreal Druid. It's just more mana that we can untap. It's playable mana that we can untap with Jorn. We also have the Sculptor of Winter. It is 1 and a green for a snow creature, an elf rogue. It's a 2/2. It taps to untap target snowland. Rime Tender basically does the same thing. It's 1 and a green for a snow creature, human druid. That's a 2/2 as well. It taps to untap another target snow permanent. Both of these will just let us untap Cold Steel Hearts, basic snow lands, snow dual lands, things like that. The last one is Replicating Ring. 3 mana for a snow artifact. Add 1 mana of any color. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on Replicating Ring. Then if it has 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicating Ring with tap, add 1 mana of any color. So Replicating Ring is definitely a lot of fun. You might not get to that very last part, but again, it's just another snow permanent that adds mana, and we want as much of that as possible in order to play as many things during our turn and being able to put as much mana into our X spells as we can. As I was going over the snow lands, I discovered some very interesting choices. So the first one is Dark Depths. You might already know what this card is just by that name. It is a legendary snowland. Dark Depths enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. Pay 3, remove an ice counter from Dark Depths. When Dark Depths has no ice counters on it, sacrifice it. If you do, create Merit Lage, a legendary 2020 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. So, Dark Depths does technically fit into our snow mana base. I wouldn't count it towards the mana base because it doesn't actually tap for any color of mana, but it is a mana sink for Jorn that does give us a very impressive threat on the board. A 2020 with flying and indestructible is absolutely nothing to scoff at. That's bigger than even Emrakul is. So definitely a threat, and just something that we can do with all of our mana. Another one, another snowland that would work very well if we untapped it is Scrying Sheets, which was reprinted in the list, so its cost has gone down very significantly. So it's a little bit easier to pick up now. So Scrying Sheets is a snowland. This one does tap only for colorless, but for one colorless and one snow, which can be paid with 1 mana from a snow permanent. It doesn't matter what color it is, as long as it's from a snow permanent. Tap the Scrying Sheets. Look at the top card of your library. If that card is snow, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. Now, we probably won't be playing too many snow cards in this deck, just because a lot of the snow cards are just, they don't work with the particular kind of deck that we're going for here. We're just going for big X spells, big spells, lots of ramp, things like that. But it's just something to do with all of our extra mana, and it does untap with Jorn's Trigger, and maybe you draw a basic land or a snow land or the odd snow permanent every maybe 1 out of 2 cards, 1 out of 2 activations with Scrying Sheets, which still isn't that bad. At the very least, it's just another snow land that Jorn untaps, and it has some added upside to it. Another one that's very similar to Scrying Sheets is Frost Augur. This one is also from Kaldheim. It is a single blue for a snow creature, human wizard. It's a 1/2. For a snow mana, tap the Augur. Look at the top card of your library. If it's a snow card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. So, essentially, the same thing as Scrying Sheets. It does have a little bit less of a cost to activate it. But because it is a snow creature, it does untap with Jorn's Trigger. So you can use the Frost Augur before you attack and after his trigger has resolved. Most of the other cards, like I said, except lands, are going to be non-snow, but you should still maybe draw 1 card out of maybe every 2 or 3 activations with the Frost Augur. So because of its incredibly low activation cost, I don't think it's that terrible to actually put into it. Another one that kind of works with a couple of cards I'll talk about later is Rime Transfusion. So it's 1 and a black for a snow enchantment. It's an aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has snow mana. This creature can't be blocked this turn except by snow creatures. So, one of the things that we want is to make Jorn unblockable, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But this card is kind of perfect. It is a snow card, which makes it on theme. It's not untappable, but it is a little bit on theme. And it makes Jorn unblockable. So there are better options for making sure Jorn gets through, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. But I do like this one more, simply just because it is a snow enchantment. It's a little bit more on theme. I want to run as many decent snow cards as I can. That way it still kind of feels like a snow deck and not just a straight-on combo deck. I like the themes like that. So, the last card, which is another card draw card, but it is an incredibly good card draw card, is Gravenlore. Another one from Kaldheim. It is 3, a blue and a blue for a snow instant. Scry X, where X is the amount of snow mana spent to cast this spell, then draw 3 cards. So, with an entirely snow mana base, you scry 5 and then draw 3 for 5 mana. That is absolutely insane. It is a great card draw that you can use at instant speed after using Jorn's Trigger. Scrying 5 and drawing 3 is an absolutely incredible rate. Putting this in conjunction with all of our X spells that draw us a bunch of cards is absolutely fantastic. Gravenlore will definitely make sure that our hand is always full. The last part is making sure Jorn gets through unharmed, so his trigger can actually go off. So, since it's not a combat damage trigger and just an attack trigger, Jorn only has to make it through combat. He doesn't actually have to connect. He only has to survive being blocked if anyone chooses to block him. So, one of the ways to do it is give him indestructible. So, you give Jorn indestructible, you attack into someone, it doesn't matter who they block, that's fine. Jorn survives anyway, and his trigger still goes off because you attacked. That's all we want. So, a few indestructible cards. The first one is Anara, Wolvid Familiar. It is 3 and a green for a legendary creature, Wolf Beast. She's a 4/4. As long as it's your turn, commanders you control have indestructible. It does have partner, but that's not incredibly relevant here. So, it just gives Jorn indestructible. It's only during our turn, so it's a little bit of a downside because Jorn will probably end up becoming a lightning rod for removal. But we do only get to attack with Jorn on our turn, so it's kind of take it or leave it. Another one is Gift of Doom. It is 4 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature has Death Touch and Indestructible. It has Morph, sacrifice another creature, so you can play the Gift of Doom face down. Has a 2/2 for 3 mana, and then turn it face up anytime for its morph cost, which is sacrifice another creature. As Gift of Doom is turned face up, you may attach it to a creature. So, all the morph text can essentially be ignored on this. The main part of Gift of Doom is enchanted creature has Death Touch and Indestructible. I like that it's an aura. 5 mana, only has to be paid once. Death Touch is a bit of an upside, but the important part about this is it just gives Jorn indestructible, so then he can survive combat damage. And then if you would rather spin off on Death Touch, that way nobody wants to block Jorn, there are plenty of auras and equipments that give creatures Death Touch. The next one, Hammer of Nazan. It is an equipment, 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. Whenever Hammer of Nazan or another equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach that equipment to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Indestructible, equipped for 4 mana. The second part of text, whenever this or another equipment enters, completely irrelevant. We're not playing any other equipment, really. We just want the free equip cost that Hammer gives us. 4 mana, play it, equip it immediately. Jorn is indestructible. It's definitely good that it attaches itself, and that helps the mana cost of it a little bit. The last one, an absolutely classic card, Darksteel Plate. 3 mana, artifact equipment, indestructible. Equipped creature has indestructible, equipped 2. This is classic commander protection. The plate itself is indestructible too, so getting rid of both Jorn and the plate is definitely going to be a little bit more difficult. Another way to make sure that Jorn gets through unharmed so his trigger can actually go off is to make Jorn unblockable. So I like making Jorn unblockable just a little bit more because a lot of these cards are a lot more low to the ground. They're a lot easier to cast. Lots of auras, things like that. They don't have a super high cost like a lot of these indestructible cards. So the first one is Canopy Cover. 1 and a green for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. So just avoid the player, basically, who has the Ur-Dragon in his command zone. Enchanted creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. And this is why I like the unblockable section a little bit more, because Canopy Cover provides 2 forms of protection on 1 card. It makes sure that Jorn gets through unblocked and unharmed, and it keeps pressure off of Jorn. They have to get rid of the Canopy Cover before they can actually destroy Jorn. So because Jorn might end up being a little bit of a lightning rod, it's definitely good to have the added protection with the Canopy Cover. Another one that's very similar to Canopy Cover is Protective Bubble. It's 3 and a blue for another enchantment aura. Enchanted creature is unblockable, can't be blocked, and has Shroud, so it can't be the targets of spells or abilities. So, with Canopy Cover, it gives Jorn Hexproof. With the Protective Bubble, it gives Jorn Shroud, meaning that you can't target Jorn either. depending on what you do, how you build it, how many of these cards you actually put in your deck, you might not care so much about the Shroud. You might care about the Shroud. But I like the added protection. And speaking of added protection, I like redundancy. So the last one in this little section is Whisper Silk Cloak. It's 3 for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. Equipped for 2. So essentially the same thing. Unblockable, can't be target of spells or abilities. It keeps him protected. Each of these cards gives Jorn unblockable to make sure that he gets through, and it keeps him protected. So, Canopy Cover only gives a kind of pseudo-unblockable, since Flying and Reach can still touch him, but you just need to be aware of what's going on the board, and you can always just avoid the player that's playing any of those creatures. If you want to go with equipment, any of these next ones are decent enough includes. The first one is Hot Soup. It is 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature can't be blocked. Whenever equipped creature is dealt damage, destroy it. And equip for 3. So, this one, really easy. 4 mana, Jorn's unblockable. Get in, untap everything, go off. Prowler's Helm essentially does the same thing. 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature can't be blocked except by walls. And again, in the same case of Canopy Covered, just avoid the person that's playing a lot of the walls. And it's got an equip cost of 2. This last one is a new one from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. It's Thieves' Tools. It is 1 and a black for an artifact equipment. When Thieves' Tools enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. Equipped creature can't be blocked as long as its power is 3 or less. Luckily for us, Jorn is exactly 3 power, and it's got equipped for 2. If you're looking to go with equipment, the soup, the helm, the tools, any of these are decent. They all have the same combined mana cost and equip cost. So Hot Soup is 1 mana to play, 3 to equip, which equals to 4. Prowler's Helm is 2 to play, 2 to equip, which is also equal to 4. And Thieves' Tools is also 2 to play and 2 to equip. Any of these are a solid choice. These next couple, I'm just going to read them off. They essentially all do the same thing at a low cost. We've got Ether Tunnel, Aqueous Form, Cloak of Mists, Invisibility, and Treetop Bracers. So each of these is just an aura. Some of these give added benefits, getting buff to power or toughness, something like that. But essentially, they all do the same thing. They're very cost-effective auras. They're very simple to play. They just give Jorn unblockable. So now, before we wrap up, we got to find out how we're getting all of these different cards into our hands. So we're going to go over the tutors. Normally, I leave this section a little bit more open because it's essentially the same thing in whatever kind of deck. If you're playing black, you play the black tutors. If you're in blue, you play whatever blue tutors you can. Most of these are staples. Most players know what these are. But I did think that there were a few interesting choices just based on the way that we have to actually build Jorn and the way that the combo is assembled. Being in black gives us everything we want whenever we want it because it's black's part of the color pie to search for whatever it wants. That part is not that hard. That's really easy. But being in blue is the interesting thing. Blue gives us access to artifact tutors to actually find the Strionic Resonator or Lithoform engine, and blue also gives us instant or sorcery tutors to find Torment of Hailfire or Mind Grind, so any of our finishers, and Thermal Flux, which is another combo piece. So we've got Fabricate, 2 in a blue, sorcery, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. That finds either Lithoform Engine or Strionic Resonator. And then we've got Mystical Tutor, search your library for an instant or sorcery card and reveal that card. Shuffle your library, then put the card on top of it. That's just 1 blue for an instant. So this lets us go get any one of our untappers, one of our triggered ability copiers, or Thermal Flux. And then the last part of the color pie, which is green, Running green creature tutors to find Rime Feather Owl isn't a great use of card slots unless we have a lot of other desirable creatures. So depending on how you build the rest of the deck, I wouldn't bother putting in the green creature tutors just to find one card. Mystical Tutor has other applications because it can either find our combo piece in Thermal Flux or it can find a finisher. But I did think that a Sylvan Scrying from green, which is 1 and a green for sorcery, search your library for a land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. I did find that to find Alchemist's Refuge wasn't that bad of a plan, because unless you're casting an instant, then you will need the ability to actually give your spells flash. So Sylvan Scrying to go find Alchemist Refuge or Emergent Zone if you really need it. I didn't think that was a bad idea. Crop Rotation also does the same thing. That puts it directly into play. You do have to sacrifice a land, but it is only 1 mana and it puts it right on the board. So blue and black give you the best tutoring colors for all of the cards in the deck. And both have many different options for different budgets as well. So for the black tutors that are a little bit more expensive, Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, these are absolute CEDH staples. These are the best of the best, and that's why they're so expensive. You've also got Mystical Tutor from blue. That's pretty expensive. It's a little bit up there, about $25, $30. But there are also many other options in both of these colors that are a little bit less cost intensive. There's Grim Tutor, which is only about $15. Diabolic Tutor, which is less than $1. These ones are more mana, have a higher mana cost, but they get the job done for a cheaper money-wise cost. Fabricate isn't that expensive off the bat. Neither is War of Invention, another artifact tutor. And then for instant and sorcery tutors, Merchant Scroll is really interesting. It is 1 and a blue sorcery. Search your library for a blue instant card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. This just finds Thermal Flux. But it also can find any of our card draw cards, any of our blue X card draw cards. So I think that Merchant Scroll definitely worth running, especially because it gets a combo piece in addition to another value piece. And then, of course, from Strixhaven, you've got Solve the Equation. This just gets absolutely anything, puts it right into your hand. So, overall, the deck can be played as a very combo-intensive commander, just looking to make infinite mana and combo out. But it also provides a lot of late-game grindy value, giving you other ways to win if you don't have the ability to combo off at all. And every part of the combo gives you plenty of value on its own. So, even without making infinite mana with Jorn, still using a Strionic Resonator to copy that triggered ability, untap everything. If you have 10 lands, you go to combat with Jorn, you float 10, untap 10, use the Resonator, float 10 more, untap 10 more, float 10 again. That's almost 40 mana, which is, it's only about 30 mana, but that's still very, very good. Maybe about 28 in order to actually activate the Resonator. But still, 28 mana is nothing to scoff at. If you put 28 mana into a Torment of Hailfire, that is a lot of damage done. 28 mana into an Exsanguinate. That's 28 damage to each of your opponent, and that's 84 life that you're gaining back from that Exsanguinate. Even without killing your opponents, that is a huge swing in your favor to deal 28 damage to 3 opponents and then gain over 80 life back. Casting Mind Grind for your opponents having to reveal 28 land cards and then milling all of those other cards. That's at least over half of their entire mana base is 28 lands. Any one of these plays, even without going infinite, is still just so ridiculous. It's a really big, swingy deck, and I really like it. Let me know how you plan on building Jorn, God of Winter, in the comments below. Let me know if you want to build Cauldron instead of Jorn. This deck is big, swingy, casts big spells, has a great combo plan, and overall, I think it's a really good deck. That's it for this time. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this. Let me know what you would take out. Let me know what you would put in. Let me know what you think about casting Villainous Wealth for X's 99 on one of your opponents and taking all of their permanents. And until then, I'll see you next time.